Okay, good evening, everybody. Tonight's shiur is called How to be a Zionist. If you're expecting a political diatribe from me, you're going to be disappointed. I'm not going to be talking about political Zionism. Or religious Zionism, non-religious Zionism, anti-religious Zionism. I'm not talking about any concept of modern Zionism. I'm going to be talking about the word Sion, Zion, and what this word means, and the depth of the understanding of what Sion is. The point of departure for our conversation tonight is in this week's Parsha, Parshas Truma, where describing the Aron, the ark. The Torah says, Va'osu Aron, Hashem says to Moshe, make an Aron, an ark, of Atzei Shittim, of Shittim wood, Amosayim v'chetzi orko, its length should be 2 amos and a half. An amma is, depending on how you measure it, between 18 to 24 inches. So 2.5 amos long, v'amma v'chetzi rochbo, and an amma and a half wide, v'amma v'chetzi kamoso, and an amma and a half high. So clearly, the Torah tells us the dimensions very clearly, very physical, dimensions of the Aron. Now, where it gets interesting is, there's a Gemara in Megillah, which says, at the beginning of Megillah, I think it's Daf Ches, Tanya nami hachi Aron she'osa Moshe yeshlo osa amos b'chol ruach. Okay, so the Aron, the Moshe Rabbeinu made, when placed into the Beis HaMikdash, the first temple, it had Osa Amos L'chol Ruach. It had 10 amos in every direction from the Aron to the walls. Uksiv, and it says Ulifnei Hadvir Esrim Ama Oirech. That's a quote from the Pasuk to source this Gemara. For Gesiv Kanaf Kruv ha'echad, one wing of the angels. There were these kruvim, not cherubim they call them in English, not angels. These were they sort of, how do you say, like statues of kruvim. Actually, the word kruv is karavia. The Gemara says, like had the faces of children. I don't want to get too much into this, but there were these statues, the kruvim ha'echad asa amos u'kanaf ha'kruva echad asa amos. One, the distance again from the wing on top of the Aron, there were these kruvim, and the distance again from the wing from the Aron to the walls of the Kodesh Kadoshim, the Holy of Holies, where the Aron was, that was 10 amos. And Aron Gufei Heichon Havakoi. In other words, what the Gemara is saying is here, and maybe we'll make a drawing of this. Anybody got a pen? Oh, maybe I should do it there. That's even better. Okay, one second. I just want to be careful I don't pull this out. It'll be better if I do that because... Yeah, much better. Wow. We have the technology. Okay, fantastic. All right, so let's say we have the Kodesh Kadoshim, the Holy of Holies in the temple, right? And this measurement is 10 amos. Right? And it's 10 by 10, but what we really want is this. We've got the Aron, let's say, here in the middle. This is not to scale, okay? Not to scale. But we know that the Amma, I just told it was 2.5, right? 2.5 by 1.5 by 2. So you have 1.5 here. Now, if you measure this distance, as we said, is 10. Right? Actually, let's make it more compelling. The inside here I want to talk about. This distance here is 10. And we'll call that x. Let's call this distance here, from here to, I'm going to rub that out, to here. Let's call this y1. And let's call the distance from here to here y2. What the Gemara is going to say is x, right? This distance here, which is 10, but let's call it x. This distance here equals y1 plus y2. How does that work? And that's what the Gemara says. Exactly, I'll quote to you. It says, Aron Gufe Heichan Hayakoi. If those are the measurements of if there was 10 amos on either side of the Aron, and we know that the total side of the, I'm sorry that I made a mistake there, the total side of in the base of Mikdash was 20 amos. So again, if you have 20 amos, and we know the size of the Aron, and as I said, if you measured from one side to the other, and the other side to the wall, it was 10 and 10, it leaves no space for the Aron. So Aron Gufei Hachakoi, how did it exist? Elalav, is it not Shema Mina that we hear as a result of this calculation, Benas Haya Oimed? It stood miraculously. There was something miraculous about the nature of the ark, and that's what we want to speak about today. How was the world created? Again, we've got the questions clear. The Torah said, yes.
So basically, the situation is that the Aaron. So from the distance of the Aaron on one side and the distance on the other side is both, let's say, 5 amos.
Well, no, it was 10. That measurement. That's I made a mistake before. This y1 and y2 are both 10, and x is 20.
Right. So there's a miraculous, like the Aaron doesn't take up space.
It doesn't take any space, right? And it says that ha'aron eina minamida. The Aaron takes up no space.
And so that's what we're going to discuss.
Which is kind of difficult to understand, seeing as the Torah gives it very concrete dimensions, right? As it says before, it's amosayim v'chetzi orko, v'amah v'chetzi rachbo, v'amah v'chetzi kamoso. 2.5 amos long, 1.5 amos wide, and 1.5 amos high. So clearly it has physical dimension. On the other hand, it takes up no space. And that's the...
People interact with it. People interact with it, right?
True, but what does that mean? What is that teaching us? So, and this is all to do with the Gemara in Yuma tells us that when Hashem created the world, He didn't create it as a solid, vast expanse of existence all at once. Rather, He created a single point, and from that single point, He, so to speak, extruded the entire universe. And actually, we know where that place, that first point is. It's about a mile from here in this direction. And behind the Kotla Ma'aravi, the western wall, on a hill where there now sits a mosque, there is a stone. That stone is called the Even Shasiya, the foundation stone. The word Shasiya comes from the word Hushtat, foundation, to found. In other words, when Hashem created the world, there was a single point of contact between the worlds above this world and this world. It's axiomatic that this is a world of time and space, and the worlds above this world have no time and they have no space. There's a different dimension. This is something that, maybe science has come to understand a bit better in modern years with Einstein, but actually this is an idea that can be found in the Maharal, that time and space are a continuum. Being as it may, this is a world of time and space. This is called the Olam HaAsiya, the world of doing. Doing has to take place in space, in an area. And the whole of the physical space-time continuum was drawn out from a single point. And as I say, that's called the Even HaShasiya, the foundation stone. Now that's an interesting place, because apart from being the place where the entire creation was drawn out from, was extruded, if you like, that was also the place where Hashem tested Avram by commanding him to bring up Yitzhak as a korban, as an offering. And that's the place where, if you remember, Yaakov Avinu, on his journey, laid his head down on that stone, and he had a dream of a ladder with angels, I don't like the word angels, malachim, going up and down on it. As it says, Vayachalom, and he dreamt, V'hinei, and behold, Sulam motzav arza, a ladder stuck into the ground, V'rosho magia hashamayma, and its head was reaching to the heavens. V'hinei, and behold, Malachei Elokim, the angels of God, Olim v'yordim bo, were going up and down on it. And as we said, that's also the place where the two Batei Mikdash were stood. And Bezrat Hashem, the third one will soon be built. It's a very fundamental place in Judaism, a very important place, a foundational place. In Psalm 50, in Tehillim Nun, which is called Mizmor La'osov, it says the following: Mizmor La'osov, Mitzion, Michlal Yofi, Elokim Hofia. How can we translate this? Mizmor La'osov, Osov was a person, Osov, Mizmor ascribed to Osov or for Osov. Mitzion, from a place called Sion, Michlal Yofi. A klal is a generality, right? We talk about Klal Yisrael, the generality of Klal Yisrael. Klal is a group, something which sums something up, gathers everything together. So Mitzion, from a place called Sion, which is the Chlal Yofi, the consummation, the summation, the apotheosis of beauty, of Yofi, Elokim Hofia, God appeared. God appeared from a place called Sion, and Sion is what is called the Michlal Yofi, the essence of beauty. Hashem appears in this world, not unsurprisingly, from this world, which is Sion, which is the place of the connection of this world and the world above it. The word Sion is an interesting word. Let's examine it a bit. If you go up to the north, to the Galil, you'll find various graves of Tanoim, Amoraim, and they're called Tziyunim, not Sionim, Tziyun. Tziyun, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Tziyun. Tziyun, the word Tziyun means to indicate, Litzayin. In point of fact, if you remember in the Haggadah, as Hashem will be reading in Pesach, it says that Klal Yisrael, one of the reasons we were saved there was that we were Mitsuyonim Sham. Now, in point of fact, the word Mitsuyan in modern Hebrew means excellent, but it's not a very good translation. A better translation, in fact, an exact translation into English would be outstanding. Something stands out. That's the idea of a grave marker, a tziyun, to indicate. A tziyun always indicates something. So we have this idea that this place called Sion, which means to indicate, which is the Michlal Yofi, which is the summation of beauty from this place, God appears in this world. And as we said, yes?
I remember seeing another translation for Zion, the monument. Is that correct?
Monument? Yeah, but a monument is really the same idea. A monument is to commemorate, to indicate. Yes?
Where are those people called Sionim? Where are those people called Sionim?
No, they're not called. The word Sion means like a grave marker.
Oh, you're saying those graves?
It'll say when you go in Sion, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. The Sion is the gravestone, is to indicate that that's where he's buried.
Right.
So another word it's not lav davka a grave. It just means this is the indication of the place of his burial. The point I'm trying to take away from this is the word Sion, which is the same letters, although pronounced differently as Tziyun, is this means to letzayin, to indicate. And the Klal Yisrael in Mitzrayim were mitsuyanim. They stood out. They stood out by their dress and their speech. they were indicated, so to speak. So in other words, if we say that a God appears in this world, Elohim Hofia, from a place which is the summation of beauty, Michlal Yofi, which is called Sion, which means to indicate. Okay. Now, let's put another piece into the puzzle. Excuse me. We said that self-same place is where the Even HaShasiyah, the foundation stone, is. Now the word, the hushtat, to found. In fact, we have the same concept in English. If you talk about the foundation of the United States of America, so that took place, I guess, with the Declaration of Independence, correct? Well, that was a moment in time, but it was also, in other words, the foundation of anything is both where it starts, and from where it starts, it contains the declaration of everything that thing is supposed to be. For example, the Declaration of Independence is both a moment in time, and yet it's also a summation of exactly what that entity is supposed to be. So, right, the Declaration. Who knows the Declaration of Independence here? Who's American? Yeah, we hold. What is it? Yeah, how's it go? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, amongst which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of money. I'm sorry, happiness. Anyway, that's not. But the American Declaration of Independence is on what the United States are founded. When we talk about something being founded on something, I'm trying to get this idea that on something being founded, it's two ideas. One is that it's where it starts, but also that sums up everything that entity is supposed to be. Okay, so in other words, if we say that the world is founded on a point called Sion, right? And Sion means to indicate, it means that this place is the foundation that sums up everything that this world is supposed to be. The word, as we said, Sion means to indicate, to point out, to show, to mark that there is something that is going on here. In other words, that it's pointing, like, so to speak, with a finger upwards, that there is a world above this world. The Even Shasiyah, Sion, is to indicate that everything in this world is to point to the fact that there is a world above this world. The entire purpose is to reveal, is to be mitzayin. There's nothing in this world which is not a reflection of the world above. There's a Yerushalayim Shel Mata, a Jerusalem, a lower Jerusalem, and a Yerushalayim Shel Mala, a higher Jerusalem. Everything in this world has a spiritual, rarefied counterpart in the worlds above. And everything in this world is here to indicate that connection. And if you think about it, that's exactly the idea of a ladder. A ladder connects. That's the whole purpose of a ladder. Why did Yaakov Avinu see a ladder? Because his dream was exactly that. He dreamt of this connection, a visual idea of the fact that this world is to be mitzayin, the connection between this world and the world above it. Yes.
And just to add, I don't know if this is explicit, but just like a ladder, connects a lower level to a higher level. Okay. Also, my question was, what about Even Shasiyah? What about the Even Shasiyah? Why is that the epitome of there is something higher?
Because when we say that something is founded, the foundation of something expresses everything that thing is supposed to be. A foundation, as I wanted to say, is not just where it starts, but it's a summation of what that entity is supposed to be. For example, the Declaration of Independence is a moment in history. It's a beginning, but contained within the Declaration of Independence is everything that the United States is supposed to be. So if we say that something is hushtat, that this world is founded, it means it's founded on the principle that it is to be mitzayin, to indicate. The whole foundation, the whole purpose of this world is wrapped up in this idea that it's supposed to indicate something. And that indication is that ladder, as you said. The connection that this world, everything in this world, is a reflection of the world above.
You're saying it's not the rock itself, it's the fact that the ladder was there?
No, I mean, there were two different ways of seeing the same thing. But the name itself, Evan HaShasiya, Hushtat, that's the foundation stone. Foundation again means something which is the point of departure, but also when we talk about foundation, that sums up everything that entity is supposed to be. Okay, let's go on. So there's a Gemara in Bava Basra. The Maharal in Beiragola, on the Gemara in Bava Basra, Daf Ayin Daled Amud Aleph. There was a certain Arab. There's a story of this Arab who used to take Rabbi Babachana, and show him all of these places. One of the places he showed them was the hole in the ground where Koach and all his cohorts descended into the ground. And there was smoke coming up from it, and he could hear voices saying, Moshe Emes, va'anachnu badim, Moshe is true, and we're fakers. We're another place that this Taya, this Arab, took Rabbi Balchana to. He said, come, I will show you where heaven and earth kiss. And the Gemara says he showed him the Mokum HaMikdash. The two realities kiss at that place. That's the place of the connection with the upper and the lower. Yes? Okay, sorry. It's okay. What happens, so that's the idea of the Beis HaMikdash. On Tisha B'Av, we mourn the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. It's impossible for us to really understand why losing the Beis HaMikdash was such a tragedy. We have great difficulty coming to understand the beauty, the significance, the elevation of animal sacrifice. It's something that's so far from our minds. And that is a litmus test as to how far we are divorced from that spirituality. It's something we just can't access anymore. We're so enmeshed in the worldview of the secular world and its view of things that at best we can accept as an article of faith that this was the most spiritual place in the world. But to secular eyes, it just looks like a vast slaughterhouse. We are so divorced from that reality. And that is the real tragedy of the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. And that's what we mourn, is that we see the two realities as disconnected. That place of connection now ceases to connect. We see heaven on one hand and we see earth on the other. We see spirituality on the one hand, we see physicality on the other. And we struggle to be able to see the spirituality and physicality. In point of fact, the Beis HaMikdash in space is what Shabbos is in time. They're the same thing. Shabbos is in time is what the Mikdash is in space. So, Tisha B'Av. As I said, from the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, the physical world and the spiritual world seem totally divorced. That is the tragedy. Let's move on and try and understand this idea from a slightly different angle. Yosef HaTzadik. Yosef, the Sfarim say that everything that happened to Yosef happened to Sion. They're parallel. In point of fact, in the morning we say in the davening, L'cha Hashem, to you as Hashem is Hagedula, V'Hagavua, V'Hanetzach, V'Hatiferes, V'Hahod, Kichol, V'Shamayim, V'Aretz. These are the midas, L'cha Hashem, Hagedula, Hagavura, V'Hatiferes, V'Hanetzach, V'Hahod, Kichol, V'Shamayim, V'Aretz. So that's Abraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov, Moshe, Aaron, Yosef. Yosef is Kichol Bashamayim. Chol means Michlal. Remember from the Gemara, Michlal Yofi. To gather together. Avram is chesed, Yitzchak is gvura, gedula, gevura. Yosef is ki chol b'shamayim. It's everything in this world, as we said, ki chol b'shamayim. That's why Yosef is hamashbia. If you remember, Yosef was the one who fed the entire world. He was mashbia. He was the gathered together everything. He was the provider of sustenance. So just as Sion is the point of contact between this world and the world above, so Yosef is the connector between the higher world and this world. He was the one who channeled all the wealth and funneled it out to the rest of the world. He provided for the world to survive in those years of famine. The gematria of Yosef is Sion, same gematria. Yosef is Yud, is 10, Yud is 10, Vav is 6, Samach is 60, Yosef, Peh is 80, 156, Tzadi, Tzion, is 90, Yud is 10, Sion, Vav is 6, Nun is 50, 156. What is this idea? Understand this idea of the connection of the two worlds from a different place, yeah?
Yesod is sort of mentioned, how should we read?
Let's leave that to the side for the moment. But yeah, you're right. This another idea, as we said before, that nothing in the physical world can exist without a spiritual influx of energy. There's a Gemara that said that Shlomo HaMelech, in B'chachmaso, in his wisdom, was able to grow plants that normally only grow in Africa, here in Yerushalayim. How was he able to do that? Because what happens is basically all the hashpah, all the influence for this particular plant to be able to grow in Africa has to come down through the Beis HaMikdash. It's life force, it's chiyus, it's to every physical thing there's a spiritual component, and without that spiritual component it can't exist. So it all comes down through the Beis HaMikdash and fans out like power cables of spirituality all over the world. Shlomo HaMelech was able to divine, to understand where that particular cable of spiritual power was, and he could plant on that line, so to speak, that cable line, something which would normally not grow in Yerushalayim, but only grow in Africa. It's the same idea, that the sustenance, that like Yosef, who was the mashpia, so Sion, that point of contact, spreads out and is able to give energy for everything in the world to exist. So let's go back to our original question. Maybe you guess the answer to it. The Aron sits at the gateway. The Aron HaKodesh sits at that place which is the gateway between a world of space and time and a world which is beyond space and time. As we said, space and time is a continuum. And therefore, quite obviously, it's really logical if you think about it. You would expect both of these realities to be expressed. On the one hand, the Aron has dimension. It's of this world. But it's sitting in a place which is the gateway to something beyond this world, and therefore it takes up no space. The Gemara in Yuma, on Daf Samach Tes Amud Beis says, Lama nikra shman anshe knesses hagdola. The men of the Great Assembly who came back for the rebuilding of the second Beis HaMikdash after the story of Purim. Why were they called the men of the Great Assembly? What was so great about them? Lama nikra shman, their name was called the men anshe knesses hagdola, the men of the Great Assembly. Shehechziru atara liyoshna, that they returned the crown to its former glory. I'll explain this in a second. Asa Moshe. Moshe came along in the Torah and he said, Hakeil, Hagodol, Hagibor, V'hanoro. Describe God as the great, the mighty, and the awesome. Now, of course, it has to be understood that the only reason Moshe was able to say this is because Hashem told him to write it down. We can't use any kind of adjectives. We're not allowed to use any kind of adjectives to describe Hashem. But the fact that the Torah itself says that, we're able to use those words. Asi Yirmiyah. Came along Jeremiah, who saw the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, Va'amar, and he said, Nachrim, heathens, Mekarkerim behechaloi, are cavorting, are partying in his heichalo, in his sanctuary. Aye Nora Sov. Where is his Nora? Where is his awe? Hashem has lost his awesomeness. Chas v'chalil, I'll explain. And therefore he said, Lo Oma Nora, do not say Nora. In other words, instead of them davening in the morning, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech, Elokeinu v'Elokeinu Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak v'Elokei Yaakov, Hokel Hagodol Hagibor v'Hanora. They took out the word Nora from the davening. They said, Yirmiyah said, we can no longer relate to Hashem through the midah of Nora. If heathens can party in the holiest place in the world, that connection place between the upper and lower in the world, they can go in there and they can party, they can cavort, they can dance and carouse. Clearly, Hashem is now not relating to us through his midah of Nora. Now, a little bit of explanation here. Of course, it has to be understood that Hashem, in his atzmuso, in his essence, is an achdus haposhet. He is totally simple, totally beyond any kind of understanding that we may have. All we can say is hu echad ve'ein sheni. There is nothing else apart from him. Ein od milvado. However, Hashem interfaces with his world. He reveals himself in different ways. So when we say that Hashem is gadol, he's not gadol. He's not describable as gadol. It means we see him relating to us. His interface with this world seems to be the midah of gadol, which is chesed. Sometimes there's the midah of gevura, which is din. Sometimes we see Hashem is interfacing with this world through his midah, his characteristic of strict justice. The midah of Nora is awesomeness. And Yirmiyah said, if Hashem can allow this to happen, it doesn't mean chas v'chalil Hashem is not awesome. Of course, as we said, Hashem is beyond all adjectives. It means he's not relating to his world, he's not interfacing with his world through this midah. And therefore we cannot connect to him, we can't relate to him through this midah. And they took the word Nora out of the davening. You look this up, it's a Gemara, it's a fascinating Gemara in Yuma. And in point of fact, they went on, and they also took out Gibor as well. But the point I want to get to is that the word Nora, yeah?
We do have those words.
Because that's why they were called the men of the Great Assembly, the Anshe Knesset Gedola, because they were machzir, they brought back, hechzira atorah liyoshna, they brought back the crown to its former glory. And how was that? As we said, Yirmiyah said, take Nora out of the davening. Now, before we move on, and we'll get to your question, what's your name? Benny, we'll get to your question in just a second. The word Nora is interesting. Because if you take the word Nora, the letters of the word Nora, and you reverse them, what does it spell? Aaron. In other words, so to speak. Sorry? Aleph. Nora. Nun, Vav, Resh, Aleph. When so to speak, what Hashem projects down from his point of view, so to speak, down that ladder of Yaakov Avinu was Nora, and the Aaron, which sits on the Evan Shasiyah, which sits on that place, is the way we perceive the Nora in this world. And as I said, if you remember Yaakov Avinu's vision, he said, Ma Nora Hamokam Hazeh. The perception that Yaakov Avinu has was specifically Nora, awesomeness. So, what was it, as Benny asked, what was why was the Anshe Knesset Gedola called the Anshe Knesset Gedola? Because they had lived through 70 years of Babylonian exile. And they said that there is a keves bein shivim ze'evim, a lamb surrounded by shivim ze'evim, 70 wolves, the 70 nations of the world, and the lamb is not eaten. That was how they restored the Nora. Hashem's Nora no longer appeared through the Aron with the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. That Nora, that awesomeness, manifested itself through the continued, illogical, unhistorical survival of the Jewish people. That is what it means to be a Zionist. A Zionist is somebody who can see that this continued, anti-historical continuation of the Jewish people is truly the Nora that now we have in our exile, where we no longer have the Aron, we no longer have. And there's a famous story that says Louis XIV once, and sorry to come back to your question, Benny, and that's when the Anshe Knesset Gedolah, then they reinstated the word Nora into the Tefillah, into Shemona Esrei. But, as we're saying, the Nora was no longer being transmitted through the Aron. The Aron now was the perception of the fact that the totally illogical, unhistorical survival of the Jewish people, a kevis bein shivin ze'evim, a lamb surrounded by 70 wolves, and yet the lamb is not eaten. This is something which is Nora. And that's why they were called the Anshe Knesset Gedolah. They were men of the Great Assembly, because that perception refurbished, so to speak, restored the crown of Hashem in this world to its former glory. Louis XIV once asked Pascal for one proof of the existence of God. And Pascal replied to him, "The Jews, Your Majesty." Pascal recognized that the survival of the Jews is mitzayen, coming back to that word before, is a Sion. It's an indicator sticking out of the some of the normalcy of this world, to say this doesn't quite make sense. Paul Davis, in his History of the Jews, tries to, all historians have to grapple with this unhistorical history of the Jews. How come we're still here? There's not another nation in history which has survived being both small in number and in a continuous state of exile for 2,000 years. How did we do it? So of course, any self-respecting historian worth his salt and wanting to get his paycheck at the end of the month is going to come up with some kind of explanation for this. So Paul Davis, in his History of the Jews, which actually is quite an interesting book, of course he doesn't have access to Chazal and the Rishonim, so his early history is way off. But he points out some very interesting things. For example, it just happened that in 1917, the government, the only government pretty much in the world who was in a position to give the Jews a state in what was then Palestine, was the British government, and the people in power in the British government at that time were all low church Welshmen who'd been brought up on what they called the Old Testament, and it was poshut to them that the Jews have to be back in Palestine. The difference, I'm not going to give you a lecture on Christianity right now, but if they'd been Catholics, I think that would have been very unlikely. The fact of the matter is, I mean, in America you see this too. You go down to the south there, they have all these people called Hezekiah and Jebediah. Where all these names come from? Chizkiyahu, Yedidiah. That branch of Christianity was very, very strong on the prophets. And it's clear, if you read the prophets at all, that the Jews are supposed to come back and we're supposed to be here. To this day that you have American congressmen who are from the south standing up in the Knesset and embarrassing the secular Israelis by their quoting the Bible and saying the divine hand of God to bring the Jewish people back to their country. Anyway, I'm not getting into Zionism. I'm just trying to point out that Paul Johnson is an interesting book, and that's one of the interesting. But Paul Davis. That's wrong. It's Paul Johnson. Paul Johnson says in his History of Jews, trying to come to a historical answer as to why it is that the Jews managed to survive throughout this incredible diaspora and persecution and assimilation. Everything you could throw at the Jewish people to make them disappear off the face of the map, and we're still here. He says the following, fascinating stuff. The Jews believe for so long, quote, I'm quoting, the Jews believed for so long and with such tenacity that they were the chosen people, that they became the chosen people. Isn't that wonderful? Didn't the French, the British, the Germans, and the Parthians all believe they were the chosen people? I mean, look at Mark Twain's famous article in Harper's Bazaar. I'm sure you're familiar with it. With Mark Twain, having visited Eretz Israel and seeing the destruction here, and he couldn't believe what the country was like, and he wrote this article about the Jews, and he said, the Persian and the Greek filled the world with sound and fury and no gone. They're all, whatever. The Greeks are sipping ouzo, and then the Romans are drinking lattes on the Via Veneto, and they're all gone. And the Jew is exactly the same. No, he's saying, shows no sign of tiredness in his bright and aggressive brain. I'm not quoting, but anyway, Mark Twain also saw. And he said, what is the secret of his eternity, of his survival? Paul Davis has this idea that we believe with such it's wonderful. I'm a great believer in positive thinking. But positive thinking gets you so far. You can believe until the middle of next week that you're a Martian, but I really doubt that you're going to start sprouting little ailerons coming out of your forehead. It just doesn't make sense. Why is that? Why is it that intelligent people say things which are just illogical? So I guess because the alternative is a little bit frightening to a historian. Because the historian, right, there is nothing outside history. The fact that there could be a divine historian who's pulling the strings from above, that just doesn't compute. I can't admit that. In fact, there was another great, not the word's great, but famous anyway, historian called, and his name's escaped me from now, I'm surprised I didn't write this down, Toynbee, Arnold Toynbee. Arnold Toynbee called us the fossils of history. Well, for fossils, we're pretty lively. All historians have this problem. What do you do with the Jews? So you're either going to have to come up with some, in my opinion, quarter-baked, not even half-baked theory about us having such self-confidence that we became the chosen people. Or, like Toynbee, you just kind of toss us aside with some remark like with the fossils of history, whatever that means. I'm not sure what that means. I mean, for fossils, as I say, we're pretty sprightly. Or you're going to have to say, it's been rigged. There's something that doesn't quite make sense here. History's been rigged. And Hashem rigged history. And that is the Nora. That is the Nora. That replaces the Aaron. That substitutes, let's say, for the Aaron. The perception of the unhistorical, supernatural continuation of the Jewish people through assimilation, through Holocaust, and nothing can eradicate us. That is the greatest Nora that there can be, the greatest awe-inspiring event. So, we'll finish off with our discussion, as we said before. Let's go back to our Mitzion Michlal Yofi Elokim Hofia. From Sion, we discussed what Sion means. Sion is an indication. Sion is the place of the Evan Hashtia, Hashasiyah. This world was founded on the premise that everything in this world is supposed to indicate there's a world above this world. Michlal Yofi, the summation of beauty. Now let's discuss what Yofi is. Yofi, the Jewish idea of beauty is, and this really pertains to our conversation about Hanukkah. The idea that beauty is skin deep is antithetical to Judaism. The idea that there's something called art for art's sake is antithetical to Judaism. The whole idea of beauty, Eishes Chayil, when we say Sheka Achein Vehevel Hayofi, that is when that yofi does not reveal anything except itself. As we say, art for art's sake is the antithesis of Jewish beauty. The most beautiful part of a person is his face. The face is the unique feature of a person. Hashem, if you think about it as a few variables, a couple of eyes, a nose, a mouth, a couple of ears, and he's managed to concoct myriads upon myriads of different faces, none of which are identical. The beauty of the face, the word in Hebrew for face is panim. Panim is the same word in Hebrew as pnim, which means inside. The beauty of the face is that it reveals the inside. When we talk about Sion is michlal yofi, the beauty that's revealed, the summation of that beauty is the revelation of that place, of its internality, of the fact that it's the connecting place between this world and the world above this world. It's being mitzayein, that connection. That is why it's beautiful, because it allows you to have a glimpse, pnim. Pnei Shabbos, the Kabbalah. Have you ever thought about that? Why do we say the face of Shabbos? The Gemara tells us that there are various things which are the threshold of perception. There's a concept in bittul. Bittul is a halakhic concept which basically means nullification. For example, let's say a liter of milk fell into the yeshiva's cholent, and the yeshiva's cholent is 60 liters. God forbid. Can you eat the cholent?
Yes.
Yes. That's called echad b'shishim. 1 part in 60. 1, 2 dots, 60. Now, if you did that deliberately, it would be mutter d'oraisa, but osed d'rabbanan. You can't deliberately go and pour in 1 liter. It would be osed d'rabbanan. If it fell in accidentally, no problem. What about if there was not 60 liters, there was only 59 liters? That would be called echad mishishim, 1 part out of 60, which would, you put that as 1, 2 dots, 59. Shabbos is 1/59th of Olam Haba. Shabbos is the face. Panei Shabbos in the Kabbalah is the face of Olam Haba. Is the place where you can see inside. And that's what Sion is. That's the michlal yofi that allows the person to grasp. By the way, the word in Hebrew for ugly, mechuar, is related to the word achor, which means opaque. All Jewish beauty is that which reveals. Something which only reveals itself is by definition cannot be beauty. It's ugly because it's opaque. So, what are we left with? What is a Zionist? A Zionist is somebody who understands that everything in this world is to be mitzayein, that there's a world above this world. Our original question, as we solved now in this week's Parsha, the Aaron, Eino min amida, the Aaron takes up no space, even though it has dimension, because the Aaron sits at that threshold between everything in this world, which is space and time, and everything above this world, which is neither space nor time. The Parshas, we're now talking about the Parshas of the Mishkan. And as we said, the Mishkan, Beis HaMikdash, we lost that. We lost that connection. We lost the connection of the Korbanot. We don't have that revelation. When a person walked into the Beis HaMikdash, Hashem's existence in the world was unquestionable. It's palpable. We, the Jewish people, are charged to be Zionists. Meaning, we have to proclaim to the world that this world is no more, has no other purpose, to reveal the fact that there is a world above this world. And Bezrat Hashem, very soon, we will fulfill our tafkid of being the agents of that knowledge in this world with the coming of Mashiach and the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash. Shea Bona Beis HaMikdash, B'mheir Yomeinu. Amen.
Amen.